Space. The final frontier. Well, it certainly is a good thing that that's not what we're talking about today, because if it was, the next person wouldn't have anything to talk about. Unless, of course, we talked about it last year in Air and Space Science, then that would obviously mean that it wasn't the final frontier. We will be taking a look at a play/story called The Merchant of Venice, written by William Shakespeare. Today on Dora the Explorer, I will be covering the three main genres that Shakespeare's plays fall under, what makes a comedy, and why The Merchant of Venice is in fact a comedy. First, I'll talk to you about the three main genres that Shakespeare's plays fall under. Alright, so the first, those three, would be the comedy. Alright, so his comedies aren't really the whole laugh your butt off type deal. They seem to be very dramatic, except that they usually end with like a happy ending, kind of like they usually end in marriage. Some of his comedies would be The Merchant of Venice, obviously Venice, Twelfth Night, All's Well That Ends Well, The Tempest, Taming of the Shrew, The Winter Tale, As You Like It, The Comedy of Errors, many more. His tragedy plays have comedic moments, but usually end in a death of the main character or on like a sad note. Some of his most popular plays that are kind of considered to be a tragedy would be the Macbeth, Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet.
There's a joke in here somewhere about that.
Julius and Cressida. Shakespeare's history plays, they focus on English monarch. He didn't really tell their tale very accurately, and thus the whole plays weren't accurate. Some of his history plays include King John, Richard II, Henry IV, 5th, 6th, Richard III, and Henry VIII. Second, I will inform you about what makes a Shakespeare comedy a comedy. So let me just start off by saying that a tragedy and a comedy look very similar in the eyes of Shakespeare, right? So modern comedies, they're very LOL or LMAO or even LMFAOAROTD. When you think of a modern comedy, you expect story, this person that tells joke, this goofy storyline. Kind of like a kid runs into a snowy field only to find out that this snowy field is actually a frozen lake, and he falls in and then he gets himself out and he falls over a lot. When you think of a Shakespeare comedy, it's a little bit different. You might think of this kid that's running in a snowy field and he finds this girl that's lost. So he takes her back to his, little village, his little town. And then they grow up together, become best friends, and then get married. And they go back to that field, and they find out that that frozen field was actually a lake, alright? And they were walking on ice, and they both could have fallen in and died. Or, some other plot twist that's very meaningful and impactful. But it also kind of has a comedic humor in it. So Shaky Boy's comedies are spotted with lots of clever wordplay, insults, and metaphors. The lover in the comedy, because the theme of most comedies would be love, at least for Shaky Boy. The lover would come across like some twist in the story, some tragedy, and in the end he would find love. One of the ways that you can kind of tell that a story is kind of kind of a comedy for Shaky Boy would be that sometimes like a little funny joke for him would be to have like female characters dressed up as male characters and like act as if they were male, disguise, we gotta figure out what our husbands are doing, stuff like that. These comedies actually emphasize the reality of human suffering, and they acknowledge it's kind of the darker side of life. They can also be kind of confused, like people can get confused on whether they're watching, reading, listening to a romance story or a comedy story. Third and lastly, I will give you the reasonings as to why The Merchant of Venice is a comedy. Yes, thanks, Bradley. Bravo to you. Now would be a perfect time to just completely interrupt my train of thought. Thank you. Much appreciated. So because this story involves three couples, pound of flesh being the crisis, and then a little side mini story, which is like, the rings, the girlfriends give the guys, or the wives, whatever. Significant other gives significant other these rings, and then they give the rings away. And then they go home. The wives / significant others / girlfriends, find out, and they're really mad. Anyway, that's why this is a comedy. I have introduced and educated you upon the three main genres that Shakespeare plays fall under, why a Shakespeare comedy is a comedy, and why The Merchant of Venice is in fact a comedy. Now remember that Shakespeare plays don't always play by the rules. He thinks he's funny because he makes complicated jokes, and The Merchant of Venice is in fact a comedy.